Thanks for joining me today. We're going to paint some apples in a still life, and I'll include the reference photo. And we're going to concentrate on blending and following contours. So I'm just going to use 4 colors, which I'll introduce. I hope you enjoy it. So I did my usual pre-planning with my swatch, and this is just on an old painting that was abandoned, and I just used the back side. That way I can get an understanding of what the blends are going to do with each other. And even though you see, let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7 swatches here, it's really just all comes from 4 colors. So I can see what I can mix to get a little bit of color harmony. So I have the Indigo was here, Sepia, Pyrrol Scarlet, and Green Gold. And then I saw, what do they do when they mix? Okay, so I can get from this Pyrrol Scarlet and Green Gold, I can get some really nice sort of intermediate colors. And then my black is actually a mixture of the Indigo and the Sepia. So I have a wide range of depth I can get from just using these 4 colors. Just off screen, I do have a palette where I can make some of those blends. This was the Green Gold and the Pyrrol Scarlet. So just showing you my overall setup. I have dirty water, clean water, and then you can see the colors I'm going to use here off to the right. I am going to do a little bit of an underpainting with that combination of the Green Gold and the Pyrrol Scarlet, just to set the stage here for us. And it's going to be so light and transparent, you don't have to worry too much about where you're going. I'm just trying to get those areas that might show through. And that's going to put a nice warm glow in those areas. So as I always do, get rid of your hard edges. So even though when it dries, we're just pulling out. So I've just added clean water and I'm just pulling that pigment out so that when it dries, my edges are only where I want them. And you can see that happens pretty fast because this I started on a dry piece of paper. Okay, so we have a nice base. And I do know already that I want some shading in here. So that's where I'm going to use our combination of the sepia and the indigo. But I'm not going to go in super dark. I'm just going to go lightly. That way I can have a nice base. And it'll kind of remind me what's holding my apples to the table, since I'm not going to be painting that out. And you do want those nice soft blends on your outsides. So just go ahead with some water and invite that paint to escape its things. And here's where you can already say, yeah, you know what, I want a few of those little spots because I want this to feel free and loose, and that's a good starter. I'm using my Rosemary and Company Series 304 brush. It does hold a lot of water, so I may end up switching to a smaller one to get more details, but I do want a very painterly style in here. So I'm gonna see how we do. The nice thing about our shadow mixture was that by having the indigo, it is a bit of cool, and shadows do tend to have coolness to them, but it might reflect some of the apple. So that's going to be the advantage of having a little bit of that sepia in there, where if we just picked a convenience color, we may not get that nice combination. For that, you'll hear me talk about color harmony a lot, but you want to use some of the same colors in different places. I love the green gold, but I do know that it's very aggressive. If I were to, I'll show you on my swatch here. If I were to have my Pyrrol Scarlet down, even if it's not as watery as that mixture, and then I introduce the green gold, I mean, watch it kind of take over. So I don't want my apples to be completely green, but I want to control some of that. So I'm going to go ahead and put, in the spirit of an underpainting, I'm just going to, whoops, very watery, just going to go ahead and get a little bit more of that green gold in there. And be cautious if you put a lot of water on and it starts to dry, you are going to get some of those weird blooms. I like the fact that these apples are going to be very textured, so I'm not really as concerned, but you can see I am pulling it out just so that I get an even wash and we don't get puddles of pigment and water next to each other, which would cause that. And you can see the introduction of this green gold all of a sudden is starting to warm up the apple and make it feel green. And again, I love this green gold, but you do need to be careful because it does take over. Okay, so before I put the red on, let's build up some of this stem area, and then that way I'll have the opportunity to spread it if I need to. So let's go ahead while it's wet and we get that nice wet on wet. Let's go ahead and introduce that sepia to this stem area where it's like a dimple. And if you get a little bit too much, you can always just, lift it, manipulate that paint, push it around so that you get it where you want it. And if you do lift, you just, in between, you just take your paper towel, lift it off, and then wipe the excess. Okay. So very delicately, I'm going to go in to the edge of this and just make some nice darks, painterly darks. And it's really just on this one side of the stem. The other thing that's kind of nice to do is as you paint one element, connect it to the next. I know as a beginner, you want to just paint the thing. Like I'm going to paint the stem. But if it isn't connected visually, it won't be as exciting and feel like everything is a unit. Okay, now here is another thing that you'll do often in your painting. This apple is in front of this apple. So I know down here, I need it to be dark to push this off. So I'm not going to do it with the browns, which might be an instinct, but now let's start to build up the red of the apple. And I see in the reference photo there is a highlight, which I kind of forgot. So I'm going to do our little technique of lifting just to expose some of the paper here in this area where I want it. For some reason you've waited too long like I did, just add a little bit of water, and then by reactivating that you can then get a nice lift. And when in doubt, you can always go in with some white gouache on the top, but I think that's going to be okay. Okay, so now I am using a bit of the blend of the green gold with the Pyrrol Scarlet because I want that red, just the pure scarlet, to be at the very end. So let's go ahead and start to give the apple some dimension by going in close to the edges. And then we can pull that in just by bringing the brush down. And as we always do when we paint, follow the contours of the apple. It's round, so my brush is going to make those same movements. And it's still quite a transparent mixture. In this area that I just talked about, I don't want to go too dark because I'm going to want this apple behind to be darker to make the front one pop. So, you know, moving with the contours. Just drag your brush. And we can use the tip of our brush to pick up some of these striations that we can see. And you can see already the benefit of having that underpainting, that it's showing through. You can always go back in on top with a little more pigment if you want to be more aggressive. And don't overwork it. This is a wash. So once you get it down, just let it be. Just try to remove any of the weird areas you've created, like I did up here, where I had a bit of a hard edge. And don't overwork it. Like I'm already starting to feel like I'm overworking that. So just let it dry. We can go back in on top. Don't worry about anything weird that happens because we can fix that with a background. So let's go ahead and move on from this. Okay, so let's do the same for the apple in the back. And I might just add slight more of the Pyrrol Scarlet to the mixture, just so that I am already starting with a heavier, a darker color, sorry. So I'm cleaning off my brush, just making sure that I feel like there's enough pigment here that I can kind of manipulate and move around. I don't want to lose that subtle highlight back here. Then I might just repeat some of that striation so that the two apples look similar. And I'm going to go in heavier in this area that I mentioned down here. We don't have to do it all in one layer, but I do want to give it a head start. So down here, I'm just going to make sure that I'm a little bit darker than this apple, and already you can see that's going to make that pop off. And if you want, you can, which I think I will right here, add a little bit of the sepia into this area down here while it's drying, and that'll darken it up the value a little bit. And I have that mixture that I used for my shadow, which has a bit of the cool, which again for shadows is nice. It'll have a little bit of the red, a little bit of the cool, and then we'll just try to integrate these. It feels a little wetter, and I can already see there's some blooming happening. So I'm just going to move quickly by taking away some of that water. just by spreading out my pigment a little bit. And we're still in the underpainting phase, so you don't have to be exact. We're really just trying to make nice smooth wash. And I didn't really want any of those big cauliflowers in there. Okay. See, just a little bit of water kind of spreads and softens the edges. Depending on how cool you want, you can add more of the indigo to that mixture. And I always encourage you to make confident strokes. Don't do too much dabbing. I saw I was doing that myself, which reminded me. You'll get a nice smoother wash by just going across instead of a lot of dabs, and you don't have as much fear about overworking the paper. The more cotton your paper has in, the more forgiving, but you still run the risk. Okay. I have one more wash I want to do on top to get more of the red color. So I'm going to stick with this brush, but then I am going to switch to a smaller round brush so that I can get some sharp details on those stems to differentiate between the round softness of the apples and the more woody texture. Okay, so now we're using pretty much just the straight Pyrrol. I do want them to be kind of punchy, maybe even more punchy red than my reference photo. And I'm studying the reference photo right now to say, where's a good place to start with the most intense red, and then where do I want to pull it out? And instinctively, I'm going toward the center area. So I'm just going to add some pigment down, not worrying too much about what it looks like. But then I'm going in with a drier brush, it's still damp, and I'm going to go ahead and, again, invite that paint outward. And really trying to follow the contour here is important so that the lighter colors, softer, are on the edges, and then we get that logical transition. You can see now from the reference photo that I completely got rid of my highlight again. So before it's too set in, I'm just gonna lift it a little bit. And just like this area here, if it's darker, this one pops, we can do the same with the highlight. So I can just go in with a little more of the Pyrrol Scarlet behind around, and that will make that highlight more pronounced. So see, it's okay. There's always a correction. Even though Scarlet is kind of blending in, I still like adding some of these, the marks, contour marks, to show which direction the light is following. And we can start to stipple it a little bit, meaning just leaving a few of these spots, because again, in the reference photo, I see some of those little green spots showing. So because we have the nice underpainting, we can just leave those areas similar to how we would do with a highlight. And down in this area here is where it's going to be heavily shaded. So it's more intense in here, but I don't want to go 100% pigment because I do want to get some of this area. So let's just do a little textured. You can see it's a bit of a dry brush, which is giving our apple a little more texture. That's not necessary if you don't feel confident doing that, but sometimes your brush just does things and you like the way it looks, so you continue. And while I'm not trying to give detail, I am seeing things in the reference photo, so I'm trying to introduce the right color so that it does the nice little watercolory soft blends. So you can just constantly look at your reference photo. Where do you need to add things? And then you can do the final layer on the top. Okay, so let's add some of the shadow in here. It's more intense. So I'm gonna take the Pyrrol Scarlet and introduce a little bit of the green gold, but then I'm gonna use our shadow color, which was the Indigo. And a little bit of the Sepia. And then using your swatch, you can always just confirm, do you like where that shadow is? Feels a little too brown, so I'm going to add a little more of my Indigo. And that feels good. So again, I'm starting with the area that I want to be the most intensely pigmented. And here's where you want to kind of blend it in with the color in the background and then lift it up. And so we need for these two areas to be connected. So that's where you just kind of have to say, how much of that pigment do you want? Do we need a little more red in there? And you can do it in stages. So don't feel you have to get everything perfect the first time, which I definitely did not. But you know, watercolor is transparent, so you do have the advantage of knowing it's going to dry lighter and show the underpainting through. So I'm just blending, marrying these two areas, and checking my reference photo. I already know I want this area to be a little more deep. So I'm just, while the area underneath has dried, I can go ahead and add a little more of that sepia in here for a little more intensity. And then just to avoid the soft or the hard edges, I'm softening those up. Again, constantly drying my brush off and trying to get a nice even wash so I don't get a lot of those blooms that occur if you leave wet areas on your page. I really want to forget about that highlight, don't I? Okay. I think that's good. We don't want to overwork. We've got the two colors integrated, let's go ahead and work on the back while we have that mixture. I'm just adding a little bit of indigo here because I can tell I need a little cool and I want it to blend in. My deepest shadows are right here where the two apples kind of meet. This apple is completely blocking the light, casting the shadow, so I want to intensify that. So I'm just adding that cool indigo and just looking compositionally. It's like, oh, you need a little here, then that means you need a little more here. So those are the adjustments we're making. So let's get this apple a little redder and deeper so that it is more intense in value. So I'm adding the Pyrrol Scarlet to my shadow mixture. And again, I'm starting with the deepest area, trying to blend these, and then I can pull it up. So where you want that edge, or it's called negative edge painting, we're painting not this apple, but the one behind to show that this apple is in front. And then again, following those contours, make sure you have clean water and a semi-dry brush, and then you can invite that pigment up and take advantage of the wet to add some of those striations as you blend. This time I'll capture that highlight. Do need to mix it a little because this highlight would be stronger than that one. So always moving that paint around for your wash so that it doesn't cause the blooming that you don't want. And you actually might not mind a little bit of it if you added a little bit of the just clean water. If it's damp enough, you can get some nice intentional blooms that will give your apple some texture. I'm just dabbing in some straight Pyrrol Scarlet, again, just for some texture. Because we know that an apple is not one solid color, so getting a little bit of that. As it dries, it can blend and cause some of those intentional blooms. That would be kind of nice. Okay, this is pretty dry, so I can go in with just that deep color that I used down in here to intensify some of that red. And you do want to avoid going too dark because we spent time to get that nice pop of the highlights. So I'll just concentrate in this area. Wow, I really want to remove that highlight, don't I? So I'm just adding water because I seem to keep doing that, and that'll give me a better. Okay. So I can see now as it dried, I see my edge here. So what does that mean? It means we need to create a darker color that's going to take over. So I'm mixing a little more of that combination of the sepia, the indigo, and a bit of the red, so that again we get that color harmony, and just try it out, and that feels pretty good to me. Might feel a little warm, so I can just add in a little more of the indigo and sort of blend those in. And then down here where the redness of the apple is meeting the shadow, you can go in with your heavier sepia tones. And just chase your hard edges so you get that nice blend. And then you can always intensify this to really pop it more. So we'll just take that same mixture and do the same thing over here. I should mention in the reference photo there's some fabric, and I just decided to ignore that. As the artist, we get to ignore what we want. Okay, So now I'm finally switching my brushes and I'm going to a smaller brush, and I think this should be a number 2 should be good. So I'm just using my silver black velvet number 2. And I'm just going to start with the straight sepia, and I'm going to follow my sketch here and try to get, this time I do want a hard line, at least right there, and then marrying the two, the stem to the center, that's where I'll just, as always, inviting the color to blend, because that's why we chose watercolor as a medium. And remember, the viewer will fill in the details that we lack or intentionally leave off. So here I just want to be not really dry brushing, but just giving a little bit of detail, not going in and drawing a straight line for the stem, because with light, with the rest of my apple rendering here, it wouldn't make sense to have it be hyper realistic. So we just are choosing what details to add and where. Okay, and I feel like that's a good dark value. We're getting a nice range. So I'm going to do the same thing back here. And of course, this portion is the wet on dry. And so we're going to get those nice crispy lines that we want. And it's sort of going to fade off into the distance. And because we introduced a little of that shadow here, we can take advantage of that and just, again, marrying those two so that there it looks like there's a reflection of some of the brown in the shadow there. And now the last thing I'm going to do, or I think it's the last thing, is I've lost a little bit of the intensity with the green gold, but now that our paint is somewhat dry, I'm not as worried about it spreading. So in this area, I'm just going to introduce some of it, and you can see it can't really take off because the paint is somewhat dry. So I'm just going to flick my brush and hint that there's some green back here. And by doing that, that will help the green that we actually have as an underpainting kind of pop out a little bit more. And we'll do the same back over here. And I don't have very much pigment at all, and it's not a very wet mixture. So you can see we have a lot of control by doing that. Okay, so just giving everything a final look. Usually there's an area that needs just a little more intensity. I think we did a nice job down in with our shadows and the blend between the two. I was a little loose on my edge here, so if you want a sharper line, just go back to your palette, to that mixture, and you can just go in with your finer brush and just give it a little little pop. And then same as you do with the big brush, just blend that out. I guess the last thing you could debate is, do you want more of a background? I kind of like the simplicity of these, even though I did tape it off. But I think I will add, because we're so ambiguous here, I'm going to add a few drops of some indigo. And that, without overdoing it, makes me feel like it came from the splatter and the paint, and just all of a sudden there's these beautiful apples. So you get to interpret your art the way you want. The only other thing you can do, if you want, if you didn't feel like you got enough highlight, like I didn't do that much here, you can either intensify the red just by going in with a little more of the red close to it. And it's a somewhat watery mixture so that it doesn't take over, look like a big blob. And you can just make that pop the same way. Of course, you have to look at your entire apple and say, if I made that more red, where else does it need to be red? Which is most likely right in here. And the other thing, which I mentioned earlier, was if you wanted to add a little bit of white gouache, you could just hit that on there. But I'm pretty happy with this. I don't feel the need. I'm just giving it that last look to say, where does it need either more excitement, more intensity, more value? But I think we did a good job following the contours while we put those underlayers in, that they feel round. I feel like this is in front of that one. So I'm going to say we're good to go. Don't forget to sign your work. I'm just going to use a pencil. I hope you enjoyed learning about blending and contouring and underpainting using this Apple Still Life. If you like this video and would like to see more tips, please let me know in the comment, and don't forget to like and follow.